Good evening. Coming to you to talk to you about my research topic. What I looked at were the implications of the Treaty of Paris, 1783. Pretty much want to look at did any elements of the treaty cause further conflict between the British and Americans, and eventually possibly caused the War of 1812. Uh, the research question I really went for was which elements of the Treaty of Paris 1783 caused future conflict between the British and Americans and eventually the War of 1812. So the first thing I looked at was actually the portrait by John Trumbull, which is currently in the rotunda of the U.S. Capitol, and this was a portrait of Cornwallis's army surrendering at Yorktown on 17th of October 1781. This was the some of the last fighting of the war, but the war didn't officially end until September 3rd, 1783, with the signing of the Treaty of Paris. Currently, there's a portrait that's unfinished of the signing, and it was owned by Henry Francis DuPont, and it's currently at the Winterthur Museum Garden Library. This is in Delaware, located about an hour from Dover and about 12 minutes from Wilmington. If anybody's in the area, I actually looked this place up, and it looks like I know last week we talked about places to go and possible trip places, and this I wish I would have known about this place for that assignment, because this is also another place I'd like to go. But the reason why the portrait's unfinished is because the British refused to sit for the portrait. The signing took place at the Hotel de York, and there were three representatives from the U.S. Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, and John Jay, along with some representatives from King George II. Thomas Jefferson was supposed to attend, but he was unable to, and Henry Lawrence was also supposed to attend, but he was captured on a ship and was actually in the Tower of London at the time, so he was unable to represent the U.S. there as well. So a quick overview of actually what's in the. I'll actually go article by article, but kind of just to summarize what's in the articles of the Treaty of Paris of 1783. They have there's a recognition of the colonies, definition of U.S. borders, secured fishing rights, Mississippi open to both the U.S. and England, address some of the issues with debts and creditors, and the treatment of loyalists as well. Okay, I'm just gonna give a quick summary of each of the articles. The first article was an acknowledgement of the 13 colonies and that England relinquished their claim to the territories. Article 2 set up the territorial boundaries. It was very confusing. The wording is very confusing. For example, they would reference certain rivers, but some of these rivers were actually called different names by different people. So it was just in the wordage kind of made some of these difficult to pinpoint exactly where they're talking about. It was, like I said, it was very vague, but it gave the big one is it gave the U.S. everything east of the Mississippi. The Article 3 were the fishing rights for the U.S. Off the coast of Canada. Article 4 established that creditors could go after debts without interference from either government. So if an American owed debts to a British company, the British company is allowed to go after those debts still without interference from the new government of the United States. Article 5 was that loyalists would get back their estates. Article 6 would put an end to any loyalist prosecution. 7, it was supposed to free all prisoners of war on both sides. And Article 9, oh, I'm sorry, Article 8, it opened the Mississippi to both the Americans and the English. Article 9, territories that were captured by either Britain or the U.S. would be given back without compensation. And 10, ratified it stated that the treaty needed to be ratified within 6 months of the signing. So, the conclusions that I kind of came up with, really, the big, some of the causes, there was a major distrust between both the Americans and the English after the treaty. That goes to boundary issues. In August 20th, 1794, uh, put put to rest some of the issues out west because of the Battle of the Fallen Timbers. This redefined some. This was led to the Treaty of Greenville, 1795. It redefined some of the boundaries. But so the British were actually helping some of the Native American groups, indigenous people, out west, and led to conflict with the Americans. Finally, conflict broke out, and it was the Treaty of Greenville that redefined some of these boundaries. There was another issue was U.S. neutrality because the British and French from 1793 to 801 they had issues, and then again another Napoleon phase from 803 to 1803 to 1805. They were doing economic blockades. The what was called the paper versus or full ship examination. So they would board ships, and normally they would board and just look at their paperwork, the cargo list, and things like that. But the British were actually doing full inspections of the entire vessel and not really respecting the U.S. They had issues with what exactly the definition of contraband would be. Um, you know, the U.S. was kind of thinking that it would only be things that would directly help the French in the conflict with Britain. But the Britain was pretty much looking at it as any even economic things. Economic trade could even help the French at the time. So it wasn't just if they were carrying just weaponry and things like that. Anything that they were going to do any kind of business with the French. The British found issue with that. And then also another major thing that led was to the impressment of the British would claim that certain sailors were deserters of the Royal Navy, and would impress them back into the service of the Royal Navy. This even left some of the U.S. ships unable to get back to port because they took so many sailors and for impressment back into the Royal Navy. There was a lot of concern of whether or not there was really no way to prove it because both Americans and the British spoke the same language. Many of them still sounded the same when they spoke the language. Hadn't really had time to develop different accents quite yet. So someone that really was American could be mistaken for a deserter from the Royal Navy and be impressed. Or there's even speculation that some were even just taken anyway, just because they could. So that was the real big deal. So I think the major articles that really caused some conflict would be really the first three. They acknowledged the colonies, but they really didn't show them the respect that they really should have, and this led to some distrust, and I think that led towards the future conflict of the War of 1812. Article 2, the setup of territorial boundaries. It didn't help that the British helped the Native Americans actually fight against the Americans. It was settled before, but it also led up to even worse relations. And then when you look at the things like the fishing rights, vessels that were possibly boarded by the uh, by the English during their economic blockades, things like that. And the big thing was is really the impressment as well too. So all of these things combined, some relate to the actual treaty. Some are like just related to some of the articles to the treaty. But I think the biggest way to describe it was just a breakdown in relationship between the Americans and the British, distrust, and then a lot of it had to do with what was happening uh, toward closer towards the War of 1812. What was actually happening on the seas compared to what was actually happening on the land boundaries. Those still caused a breakdown in relationships, but I think it was what actually happened on the sea is what really led to causes for the War of 1812. I hope you enjoyed this, and thank you very much.